Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. A huge announcement for the 2024 Senate race. Jim Banks says he will leave the U.S. House to run for the Senate. He's angling for this seat Mike Braun is vacating to run for governor. Banks talked to our government reporter, Garrett Berquist.
Let's welcome in Congressman Jim Banks. Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So about a month ago, you announced that you were exploring a run for the Senate. What tipped you into the yes column?
Well, when Mike Braun told us he was running for governor, opens up the Senate seat in Indiana, so it's open in the 2024 cycle. My wife and I, our three daughters, who are 13, 11, and 9 years old, we spent the holidays really thinking about it, praying about it. We feel deeply that Indiana is a conservative state and deserves a conservative senator.
What role did Senator Mike Braun's decision to vacate his seat and run for governor play in your decision to run for the Senate and not another term in the House?
Well, it doesn't happen that often. An open U.S. Senate seat, and in Indiana, the opportunity to serve Hoosiers on in a bigger way than what I've been able to in the House of Representatives. It's just an opportunity that at the end of the day, I couldn't pass up, especially because the last 6 years serving in the House, so many frustrating examples of watching what's going on in the Senate and just not seeing a fight, a big enough fight against big spending, a big enough fight to restore America's military and confront the China threat, a fight against wokeism and the cancel culture.
You've positioned yourself as a no-compromise conservative during your time in Washington. The Senate historically has been an institution that runs a lot more on individual relationships and deal-making. How do you expect to operate in that environment?
Well, I've led the largest conservative caucus in the House and just believe strongly that America is at a crossroads. What kind of country are we going to leave behind to our kids? Again, my daughters are young, and I'm worried that they won't be able to pursue the same great American dream and opportunities that I had as a kid growing up in a small town, son of a factory worker. My mom was a nursing home cook. I've lived the American dream. I'm worried about where this country is going, and I believe that in the Senate, we need a new generation of conservatives who won't back down, who will fight for our American values, our American way of life.
Border security has played a pretty significant role in your previous campaigns. We still have not seen any action from Congress on people who are already here who are recipients of deferred action for childhood arrivals. How do you plan to change that if you are elected to the Senate?
Well, first of all, I will never support legislation to grant amnesty to those who came here illegally. And the very first thing that we have to do is secure the border. We have millions of illegals come across the border since Joe Biden has been president. Biden reversed the very effective Trump policies that secured the border, and now we have a wide open border. And the consequences of that is larger for Indiana than I think what most people even recognize. I mean, the fentanyl epidemic that's flowing over the border, it's manufactured in China, flowing over the border with the Mexican drug cartels pushing it over the border in record amounts, and it ends up in communities all over Indiana.
But again, what about the people who are already here, specifically those who were brought here as minors by someone else and received DACA?
Yeah, this is an unprecedented situation that we have at the border right now. Millions coming across the border illegally since Joe Biden has been president. We have to fix that. Fix that first. Don't grant amnesty because it just attracts more to come here illegally. And we have to declare war on the Mexican drug cartels. I mean, we have to be tougher on them than we've ever been before to stop them from poisoning this country with the record amount of drugs that are coming over the border. So before we talk about anything else, we have to secure the border first. That and back when Donald Trump was president, there were compromise bills that would have handled DACA in exchange for securing the border and giving the president the money that he needed to build the wall. Those bills unfortunately didn't pass. So there are avenues to do that, but we can't deal with that until we focus on securing the border first.
You say on your campaign website there is more federal lawmakers must do to protect life. Do you plan to push a federal abortion ban of some kind?
Well, I celebrate the end of Roe v. Wade. I was very pleased with that, and I'm glad that in Indiana this was the first state in the country after the Dobbs decision to pass a pro-life bill in our state. I'm ardently pro-life. I'm never going to back away from that. And when there are bills in the Congress that would ban abortions for abnormalities or sex selection, those are opportunities of bills that we can pass. Last week, we actually passed in the House a very important bill to save babies who are born after a botched abortion. So those are important policies that we can pass and move forward. Obviously, we have the most pro-abortion president we've ever had in Joe Biden in the White House. So I don't see him signing pro-life bills into effect. But the House of Representatives, which is very pro-life, Republican majority, I envision that we'll continue to pass pro-life bills.
Your announcement came a few days after the Club for Growth launched a preemptive attack ad against Mitch Daniels, who has not made any formal campaign moves. Now, the Club for Growth has been very supportive of you in the past. Was there any coordination between your campaign and Club for Growth on that ad?
Well, of course not. And first of all, I respect Mitch Daniels. I called him last week to tell him I'm running. I know he was thinking about it. I called to let him know I respect him. I served in the state Senate in my 20s when he was at the very end of his time as governor. I learned a lot from him. I'm running for Senate because I believe Indiana deserves a conservative senator, a conservative fighter in the United States Senate, and I'm focused on making my case. I'm sure there will be many others who look at or get into the race along the way, and I'm excited about getting out around the 92 counties of our state and making my case.
Congressman Jim Banks, thanks for dropping by today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Democrats wasted no time reacting to Banks' announcement. Chairman Mike Schmoll says Jim Banks' tenure in Congress can be described as leading with arrogance and extremism and ignoring the interests of Northeast Indiana. He goes on to say his no votes on economic investments, job creation, and historic infrastructure investments show he cares less about the future of our families and workers and more about the scandal of the day in Washington, D.C. All right, coming up, the state's highest court gets its first chance to rule on the abortion ban. All right, welcome back to All Indiana Politics. On this Sunday, 5 judges will decide whether an order blocking Indiana's abortion ban will remain in place. This is part of a lawsuit that challenges the ban on privacy grounds. Here's some of the testimony before the Indiana Supreme Court.
Tell me your argument for us deciding a full merits before the case has been tried out in the trial court.
It's not clear what a trial would cover. The trial court said that there's a right to abortion under the Constitution, and this law violates it. There's no...
I did not find they said that. So let's say we don't agree that they did not. So you're saying that the trial court below found the law unconstitutional?
Yes.
I did not read that. It was the preliminary injunction standard that we have in Indiana. Yeah. If they made a prima facie, which is sort of the lowest standard of proof, likelihood of success on an open issue.
It's not clear what legal standard would even apply on a trial. I don't know what proof we would bring forward. The trial court's view is that there's a right to abortion. This law says abortion can't exist.
So we ignore all our jurisprudence with regard to the lens that we look at a case that comes up to us, not on a full merits, but on a preliminary injunction. You want us to review that case law?
Well, the principal inquiry under a preliminary injunction is likelihood of success on the merits. Our position is that there's no likelihood of success on the merits because there's no right to abortion in Indiana. If we are
would you agree with me that that's an issue of first impression?
Yes, I think it still is. Sure. Yes.
That the court had a chance to review on that in the Brizzi case, right. And that was a fractured court with one justice finding there was a right, one justice finding there wasn't a right, and the majority dodging the question.
Yes, assumed the right to exist, right. Yes, and then assumed a standard. But there's no reason to understand what that standard would be. What would we be having a trial over?
Let's talk about the merits briefly. Is it the state's view that the state constitution protects no unenumerated rights?
Well, I think what the court would have to do, as far as Article 1, Section 1 goes, we don't think that there is a judicially enforceable right there. More broadly, if the court is asking a question, for example, under Article 1, Section 23, about whether a statute draws a lawful distinction, it always has to ask the question about the police power. Is this a proper and appropriate, a lawful use of the police power? So I think there are vehicles for asking those same questions.
So is it the state's position that Article 1, Section 1, which largely lifts language straight from the Declaration of Independence, is not in any way or under any circumstances judicially enforceable?
not on its own. And I think that this court has used it in some circumstances to, for example, aid in statutory interpretation, as it did in the Lawrence case. That's perfectly appropriate. Trying to discern whether there are standalone rights within life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, I think is not something that the judiciary is in a position to do.
This court has on multiple occasions embraced original public meaning as a way of interpreting the Constitution. Would we not have to abandon that?
Not at all.
In order to rule in your favor?
Not at all. Again, what is the core value? What is the core value in Article I? What did Chief Justice Shepard say the founders thought? The founders thought that liberty meant the ability to manage one's own life except in those areas yielded to the body politic. That's exactly what Justice Perkins said in Beebe and Herman. Justice Perkins, the only justice of this court who served both before and after the 1851 Constitution. That is liberty, and we have to apply that today. As I said, in 1893, we applied it to deal with a woman becoming an attorney. Today, we deal with it in terms of women being able to
What else does it mean?
I'm sorry?
What else does it mean? Does it mean the right, for example, to use illicit drugs because it's my body and I'm in a position I have self-determination? Does it include the right to physician-assisted suicide? I mean, what other rights fall within the broad right that you're asking us to embrace?
Well, this court has put limiting principles on its analysis. The first thing, obviously, is there has to be a material, not a slight burden. And even if there's a material burden, this court has noted that that burden can exist if to effectuate that interest would, in essence, create an individualized harm analogous to tort. If you have assisted suicide from a third party, that's a tort. The third party is committing a tort. If you are talking about things like drug use or wearing a seatbelt, you're talking about a much more de minimis impact on one's ability to have one's own identity.
Does that mean, in your view, that there was no right to abortion under Article I, Section 1 in 1851?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, we don't know from looking at that. Again, I think the better analogy is what would the founders have said if there was another law burdening reproduction. Hoosier women cannot have more than 2 children. Again, I don't know what they would say, but I would have to think that someone would have said, you know, if given their thoughts and expressions on liberty, that would seem to clearly violate a liberty interest. And if that clearly violates a liberty interest, then bringing us up to the modern day, we're talking about the same liberty interest with regard to abortion.
All right, coming up, we dive into the week's biggest political stories with Indiana's best political team. All right, welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome back 2 members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Kip Tew and Republican Allie Bartlett. Good to see you both. Lots to get to this week. So we begin with the biggest story of the week. Jim Banks launching a Senate bid. Allie, Banks has a strong donor network, as you very well know, and a lot of support from the party's conservative wing. Does this clear the Republican bench, in your opinion?
I don't know about that because we haven't really been able to see yet what the Republican bench is. You know, there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not Mitch Daniels will run. Victoria Spartz also put out a statement that she was considering the run. I'm not sure that it necessarily clears the bench, but I do think that it's going to have an impact on how the race will come out because, as you said, Jim Banks has deep-rooted support within the party.
Kip, to that point, Banks is unlikely to make any unforced mistakes on the campaign trail. So how do Democrats counter him, first in the primary and then potentially in the general election?
Well, first of all, I liked your analogy about clearing the bench because I think what you're going to have here is a bench clearing brawl inside the Republican Party. And the potential certainly exists. Clark McGrath did last week attacking Mitch Daniels, the former governor and former president of Purdue, who was making a lot of noise, and his friends were making a lot of noise about him getting in. I anticipate that it's pretty likely that we're going to have a one battle between Jim Banks and Mitch Daniels, and it's going to be a fight for the soul of the Republican Party. Mitch Daniels represents the establishment, the traditional conservative portion of the party, whereas Jim Banks represents the MAGA portion of the Republican Party, and we're going to see which one succeeds in 2024 for the U.S. Senate.
Okay, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Other news that we want to get to today is the Indiana Supreme Court, as you very well know, deciding whether to uphold a lower court's order that blocks Indiana's abortion ban on privacy grounds. Kip, we'll go back to you on this one. The ACLU basing its argument, as you know, on language in the state constitution involving life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't this a pretty broad statement to use when it comes to specific rights such as access to abortion services?
Yeah, there was some skepticism by Chief Justice Loretta Rush with regard to using that portion of the Supreme Court of the Indiana Constitution. I will say it was pretty interesting to me, though, that the attorney for the state of Indiana had to admit that a total restriction, a total ban on abortion probably violates Indiana Constitution. We didn't get as much information from him or the court with regard to what that means, but what it means to me is there is a constitutional right to abortion in state statute, in the state's constitution that was admitted to there, and we're going to wait and see what happens with the court.
Allie, your thoughts on what happened this week?
Yeah, sorry, it was a little hard for me to hear there, but I think I heard Kip say that there was some sort of admission about there being a right to abortion under the Indiana Constitution, which was not stated by Fisher at all, the state's attorney. Actually, quite the opposite. It's that there's a question as to whether or not this would fall under a right to privacy that exists under the state's constitution, and whether or not, procedurally now is the time for the Supreme Court to look at that question. I don't think there's really anything out there that's telling us that there's an explicit right to an abortion under the state constitution, and that's what we're looking for a decision from the Supreme Court.
Okay, and we'll wait on that. Hey, I also want to get to some legislative topics this week as well. Several bills in the General Assembly, guys, focus on transgender students in particular. There's a bill to forbid teachers from using pronouns that differ from the gender on a child's birth certificate. There's also another one to require schools to inform parents if a student tries to use a different bathroom or locker room. Allie, why go in this direction?
I think the reason to go in this direction and the goal of filing legislation like this, number one, this is going to be debated. There's going to be changes. We don't know what the final outcome will be. I think the goal here is to really just set the tone for moving forward and to eliminate uncertainty, especially in the classroom and for teachers and administrators as to what they're supposed to do. I know personally educators within my family who have been pressed on both sides of this issue, who have no idea what the appropriate way to respond to something like this is. And especially when we're talking about children, this is a whole different issue than adults. Adults have, the ability to think through these things. They have the ability to decide how they want to be seen or how they want to live the rest of their lives. Children are who they are, and they're trying to eliminate any confusion going forward about how these situations should be handled.
Kip, were you surprised that Republicans are focusing on this?
No, I'm not surprised, unfortunately. And I think Allie just had a word salad because he doesn't know what to say about it. And let me be blunt. Republicans are trying to distract us from what's really important in the state. This issue is not on the top 20 list of things we ought to be worried about in the state of Indiana. It's not on a list of top 50, but it's something easy that people can beat up on some of the most vulnerable people in the state of Indiana. And I think that it ought to stop. I know it's not going to stop, but I think it ought to stop. We ought to be worried about a lot of different things than this.
Okay, Allie, I see you reacting. Go ahead.
I'm happy to clarify any of my points. I don't think there was any sort of word salad or confusion there. I think, number one, this is not a priority item on either the House or Senate agendas, by the way. This is not a distraction from anything. It's something that's real and that exists. And I have personal experience, like I said, with educators in my families that have questions about how they're supposed to handle these things. Kids do not have the ability to make these decisions yet, and that's why we're focusing on it, although it's not a priority. There's been legislation filed, that's it.
Okay, Kip, 30 seconds left. I'll let you have the last word.
Well, I think at least 7 bills in the House that are focusing on this. I haven't even looked at how many are in the Senate. So if it's not an important component, I hope you're right, Allie. I hope we don't discuss it. I hope it doesn't get a hearing, but I think you're wrong.
All right. Well, you know what? We're having a hard time hearing you, Kip. I appreciate the conversation, one that we will continue to have, obviously, throughout the next couple of months. Good to see you both. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. All right, thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics this week. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast. It's part of the All Indiana Podcast Network at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.